The sound of glass shattering against worn oak made every head in the outpost turn. Beer, golden and foaming, spreading across faded denim like spilled blood across a battlefield. The liquid dripped onto the bar stool below each drop, marking time in a room that had suddenly gone very, very quiet. Rowan Sterling didn't move. 33 years old, light brown hair pulled back in a bun that had given up halfway through her shift. Green eyes that had seen too much in 12 hours at Coronado Medical Center's emergency room. Fair skin dotted with freckles across a nose that had never needed makeup to hide what life had written there. She sat alone at the corner of the bar phone, face down on polished wood that remembered 1,000 stories just like this one. Her gray t-shirt now bore a fresh stain. Her shoulders carried the weight of lives saved and lives lost. Her hands rested flat on the counter, steady despite the exhaustion that lived in her bones. The Outpost Bar wasn't a place for quiet nights. San Diego. Friday, 22:47 hours. The kind of establishment where Navy SEALs came to remind themselves they were still human. Where operators fresh from classified missions tried to wash away the sand and the screaming with enough whiskey to drown memory. Where the walls wore unit patches like medals and the air tasted of salt water and suppressed trauma. 53 patrons, mostly military, some active duty, others carrying the particular posture of men who would always stand like they were waiting for incoming fire. Sergeant First Class Bryce Callahan towered over Rowan's seated form. 6'3" of muscle earned in places where weakness meant death. Arms that looked like they belonged on a different species entirely. Bald head gleaming under neon beer signs that painted everything in shades of red and blue. Navy SEAL trident tattooed on his right forearm, dark ink that had probably hurt less than the missions it represented. 32 years old and carrying the confidence of a man who had never lost a fight that mattered. Behind him, 4 teammates. Same build, same bearing, same smirk. Oops, Bryce's voice carried through the sudden hush. My bad, sweetheart. The word landed like a slap. Sweetheart. Condescending, dismissive. The kind of word men use when they wanted to remind women of their place in spaces that weren't meant for them. Rowan reached for the napkin dispenser. Slow, methodical. The movements of someone who had learned to conserve energy for when it truly mattered. She pulled 3 napkins, folded them once, began blotting the beer from her shirt with the careful precision of someone dressing a wound. No anger, no tears, no reaction at all. Just a woman too tired to rise to bait. Bryce leaned closer. His breath carried the sweet, sick smell of whiskey and poor decisions. His shadow fell across her like a threat. This ain't a place for tourists, baby. The outpost is for real warriors. You should head on home before you get hurt. His teammates erupted. Laughter, high fives. The performative brotherhood of men who needed an audience to feel complete. They surrounded Bryce in a loose semicircle, blocking any easy exit. Not overtly threatening, too well trained for such obvious intimidation. But the message was clear. This was their space. She was trespassing. The entire bar watched. Conversations died mid-sentence. Pool cues rested against tables. Even the jukebox seemed to lower its volume, as if the universe itself sensed something about to break. Rowan set the soaked napkins aside. She pulled fresh ones from the dispenser, continued her work, patient, unhurried. Like she had all the time in the world, and these men were nothing more than weather she had to endure. Bryce's smile faltered. He'd expected fear, anger, tears, something, anything. The silence was worse than resistance. It suggested he didn't matter enough to warrant a reaction. Pride is a dangerous thing in dangerous men. Hey! His hand shot out. Massive fingers clamped down on Rowan's wrist. I'm talking to you. The contact was unnecessary, aggressive. The kind of touch designed to establish dominance, to remind her who was stronger, to make her feel small. Bryce would later review the viral videos that flooded social media that night. He would watch them frame by frame, trying to understand exactly when his world had shifted. He would pinpoint the moment with perfect clarity. The instant his fingers touched skin marked by a faint circular scar that looked suspiciously like an old bullet wound. What happened next took 1.8 seconds. No one saw Rowan move. One moment she was seated passive, absorbing his grip with the resignation of the exhausted. The next, Bryce's face was pressed against the bar, his arm twisted behind his back, in a hold so perfect it belonged in a training manual. His 240 pounds of muscle completely immobilized by a woman who hadn't bothered to stand up. The room held its collective breath, not anticipation, shock. The kind of stunned recognition that follows when reality breaks its own rules and nobody knows how to process it. Rowan released him. She sat back down on her stool as if nothing had happened, picked up her phone, glanced at the screen, set it aside again. Her movements were unhurried, deliberate, like someone conserving energy for a long shift ahead. Bryce pushed himself up from the bar, his face flushed red, embarrassment and rage fighting for dominance across features that had forgotten what humiliation felt like. He rubbed his wrist where her grip had left marks. In all his years of training through BUD/S and advanced operator courses, he had never been taken down that quickly, that cleanly, that completely. Lucky shot, he muttered, but his eyes told a different story. They held something new, something that looked disturbingly like fear. Captain Sloan Mitchell stepped forward, 34 years old, blonde hair pulled back in a regulation bun so tight it could cut glass. The lone female officer in Bryce's unit. Her posture radiated authority, the kind earned through proving yourself twice as hard for half the credit. She wore civilian clothes, but she moved like someone perpetually ready for inspection. You just assaulted a United States Navy SEAL. Her voice carried ice and iron. Do you have any idea what kind of trouble you're in? Rowan turned to face her. No defiance, no apology, just the weary expression of someone who had finished one fight and could see another forming on the horizon. Water, please, she spoke to the bartender, Midwestern accent softening the edges of her words. With ice. Garrett Knox studied her from behind the bar, 66 years old, former Army Ranger with sleeves of military tattoos covering both arms. Each piece of ink told a story most people couldn't imagine. He'd worked the outpost for 5 years, seen every kind of military posturing, every brand of civilian confrontation, the drunken brawls, the pissing contests, the endless need for men to prove they were harder than the next guy. But this was different. The woman's request for water instead of another beer. The way her eyes had already cataloged every exit, every potential weapon, every person who might pose a threat. These weren't habits learned in a weekend self-defense seminar. These were instincts drilled into muscle memory through thousands of repetitions in environments where failure meant death. Knox filled a glass with ice, added water, set it in front of Rowan with the care of someone handling something unexpectedly fragile. A voice emerged from the back corner. That was Krav Maga. Thompson, grizzled veteran in his 50s wearing a faded army jacket that had seen better decades. His eyes held the particular glaze of someone several drinks past coherent, but his voice carried certainty. Military Krav Maga, not the watered-down gym version. Bullshit, Dmitry Volkov called out from his table near the dartboard. The private military contractor stood. 6'4", 270 pounds of muscle earned in conflict zones where rules of engagement were suggestions rather than laws. Slavic accent thick with amusement and vodka. Lucky grab is all. Little nurse probably watched YouTube video. The word rippled through the crowd. Nurse. Someone had recognized Rowan from the hospital, had seen her in scrubs at Coronado Medical Center. The narrative formed quickly. A tired healthcare worker had gotten lucky against an elite operator. Tension eased slightly, replaced by the anticipation that preceded every bar fight in military towns. Marcus the bouncer moved closer. 6'5", former Marine with a face that suggested too many close encounters with IEDs. He positioned himself for intervention. But before he could act, a hand rose from the corner booth, subtle, commanding, a gesture that stopped Marcus mid-step. Master Chief Thaddeus Flint Garrison sat in the shadows nursing his third whiskey, 68 years old, 6 feet of weathered muscle and hard-earned wisdom, silver hair cut high and tight in a style that hadn't changed in 45 years, face carved from desert stone and battlefield decisions, eyes that had seen 3 wars and countless operations that would never appear in any official record. 25 years in Army Special Forces, Delta Force operator during Desert Storm, Iraq War veteran, JSOC senior advisor until retirement 3 years ago. The kind of man whose name younger operators spoke in hushed tones when they thought no one important was listening. Flint had been watching since the beer spilled. Something in the way Rowan had transitioned from seated to standing. The precise angle of the arm lock. The distribution of weight that kept a man twice her size completely immobilized. These weren't self-defense class moves. This was muscle memory, drilled into someone through thousands of repetitions in environments where failure meant death. He recognized it because he had trained people to move exactly like that, his hand holding the whiskey glass tightened. Memories flooding back unwanted and unavoidable. Afghanistan, 2013. Operation Reaper, a valley where everything went wrong and one operator held the line when everyone else fell. No, it couldn't be. She was dead. Listed as KIA, he had seen the casualty report, had attended the memorial service, had spent 12 years trying to forget. But bodies didn't always stay buried. Neither did ghosts. You got lucky, Bryce said, his voice carrying through the bar. His composure was returning, falling back on bravado that had carried him through countless missions. But luck runs out. How about we settle this properly arm wrestling, right here, right now? His teammates cheered the suggestion. This was familiar territory, a contest of pure strength where technique mattered less than raw power. Bryce had never lost an arm wrestling match in his unit. His biceps were the size of most people's heads, his forearms corded with muscle from years of specialized training. Rowan took a sip of her water. No, thank you. Scared, Sloane interjected. Her voice carried a particular brand of condescension, the kind reserved for civilians who didn't understand military hierarchy. I don't blame you. Beating someone in a surprise attack is one thing. Facing them in a real contest is another. The crowd grew. Other patrons abandoned their pool games and conversations, forming a loose circle around the developing drama. Phones emerged from pocket screens glowing with the recording icons. In the age of viral content, a confrontation between a Navy SEAL and a civilian woman was social media gold. Tell me something. Rowan turned slightly to face Sloane. Her voice never rose above conversational level. Third phase of BUD/S training, week 5. What's the standard procedure for underwater knot tying when your dive buddy experiences shallow water blackout? The question hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Too specific. The kind of detail that didn't appear in documentaries or recruitment videos. The kind of information that lived in classified training manuals and operator experience. Sloane's confident expression faltered. How would you? Because the procedure they're teaching is wrong. Rowan continued. Still conversational. Still calm. The recovery position they mandate increases the risk of secondary drowning by 33%. Any special operations medic who's actually dealt with blackout scenarios in combat diving operations would know that. The music from the jukebox seemed to fade into background noise. Pool players frozen mid-game. Conversations dying. Every eye fixed on this exchange that had shifted from entertainment to something more significant. Something that had suggested depths nobody had anticipated. Knox set down the glass he'd been polishing. His hands rested on the bar. Prove it. He reached beneath the counter, pulled out a Glock 19. Unloaded, used for teaching concealed carry classes in the back room on Tuesday nights. You talk like you know weapons. Let's see it. How fast can you field strip this? Rowan glanced at the weapon, then back at Knox. 14 seconds with proper tools, 23 without. Knox scoffed. The range record here is 32 seconds, set by a SEAL Team 6 operator. You're saying you can beat that? Yes. One word, no arrogance, no hesitation, just facts stated as plainly as giving the time of day. Knox slid the weapon across the bar. Show me. Rowan picked up the Glock with her left hand. Her right still held the water glass. She took another sip, set it down carefully, then turned her attention to the weapon with the focus of someone for whom this was as natural as breathing. What happened next would be replayed millions of times across social media platforms. Analyzed frame by weapons experts and military enthusiasts worldwide. Discussed in forums and comment sections by people who thought they understood what they were watching. Her movements were economical, precise, almost boring in their efficiency. There was no flourish, no showing off. Just the systematic disassembly of a weapon by someone who had done it so many times that muscle memory had replaced conscious thought. The slide came off, the barrel lifted free, the recoil spring assembly separated. Each component placed on the bar in a perfect line, oriented exactly as military armorers were trained to arrange them. Not for show, but for function. So reassembly could happen in darkness, under fire, when seconds meant the difference between living and dying. 14.2 seconds. Knox's voice carried disbelief and respect in equal measure. With one hand. Not even the sound of breathing disturbed the stillness. Pool players frozen. Conversations dead. Every eye fixed on the woman who had just rewritten their understanding of what was possible. Bryce stood frozen, his challenge of arm wrestling forgotten, his face pale beneath its permanent tan, looking at those disassembled weapon components like they were evidence of something he didn't want to believe. Thompson weaved closer, his bloodshot eyes fixed on Rowan with the intensity of someone recognizing a kindred spirit in darkness. You smell like death. His voice carried conviction that cut through the alcohol. Not the hospital death, the other kind. The kind that clings to you in places where the Geneva Convention is just toilet paper. That's enough, old man. Dmitri stood from his table. His massive frame cast shadows across the floor as he approached. Smart-mouthed nurse needs lesson in respect. In my country, we have way of dealing with women who forget their place. The atmosphere shifted, from curiosity to threat. Marcus the bouncer moved his hand closer to the baseball bat kept behind the entrance. Sloane half rose from her seat, but Rowan remained perfectly still. Only the slight adjustment of her feet beneath the bar stool suggested she was even paying attention. When Dmitri moved, it was with the confidence of someone who had never lost a fight that mattered. His grab was textbook private military contractor. Direct, brutal, designed to establish immediate physical dominance. His hand reached for Rowan's shoulder, intending to spin her around, to force her to confront him directly. To make her understand the mistake she'd made by disrespecting men who killed for a living. The next 3.4 seconds would be discussed in combat forums and military analysis blogs for years. Rowan didn't block the grab. Instead, she moved with it, using Dmitri's own momentum against him. Her body rotated, her weight shifted, and suddenly the massive contractor found himself off balance. A foot swept his ankle with surgical precision, an elbow found his solar plexus. His diaphragm spasmed, cutting off oxygen supply before his brain could process what was happening. By the time his mind caught up to his body, he was already on the floor, gasping for air that wouldn't come. 270 pounds of trained killer reduced to helplessness by a woman who hadn't bothered to stand up. Rowan was still seated on her bar stool, water glass in hand, as if the entire sequence had been nothing more than swatting away a persistent fly. But those watching closely saw details the cameras caught in high definition. The way her feet had repositioned, the micro adjustments in her posture, the fact that she'd struck 3 specific pressure points in a sequence that spoke of advanced close-quarters combat training, the kind that didn't exist in civilian self-defense courses, the kind that got people killed if they used it wrong, the kind that only existed in classified programs that trained people for missions that never appeared in any official record. The door opened. Evening air rushed in carrying salt and diesel. A figure stood silhouetted in the entrance, backlit by streetlights and the neon glow of signs advertising beer that tasted like nostalgia and bad decisions. Admiral Robert Hayes stepped into the outpost, old-school military, the kind of flag officer who had earned his stars in places the news never reported on. His eyes swept the room in a tactical assessment that took less than 2 seconds. They found the disassembled Glock, the contractor gasping on the floor, the crowd frozen in anticipation. Then they locked onto Rowan's face. Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, disbelief, the particular horror of seeing a ghost made flesh. "Who taught you that?" His voice cut through the tension like a command. Rowan turned slowly to face him. For the first time since the encounter began, something changed in her expression. Not fear, not concern, but a weariness that suggested she'd hoped to avoid this moment, that suggested she knew exactly what came next and wanted no part of it. From the corner booth, Flint was already on his phone, speaking in low, urgent tones. His weathered face had gone pale beneath its permanent tan. He'd recognized something in that 3-second sequence, something that connected to briefings in rooms where recording devices were forbidden and names were never used, something that brought back memories he'd spent 12 years trying to bury. Bryce found his courage again. Bolstered by the presence of senior command, he moved to stand with his teammates, forming a loose semicircle that effectively trapped Rowan between them and the bar. Not overtly threatening. They were too well trained for such obvious intimidation, but the message was clear. This conversation wasn't ending until they had answers. "Everyone who served has a call sign," Bryce announced loud enough for the entire bar to hear, his confidence returning now that he had backup. "If you're who you claim to be, some kind of operator, then you'll have one. So let's hear it. What's your call sign?" The challenge hung in the air, heavy with implication. In military aviation and special operations, call signs were sacred. They were earned through notable events, embarrassing moments, characteristics that defined an operator among their peers. They were as fundamental as ranks and serial numbers. Part of the identity, part of the culture. To claim advanced training without a call sign was like claiming to be a surgeon without knowing what a scalpel was. Outside, through the bar's tinted windows, a black SUV screeched to a halt in the parking lot. The engine still running, someone inside making a phone call that would change everything about to unfold in the outpost. Bryce pressed closer, his fellow SEALs flanking him. They had Rowan surrounded now, 5 elite operators forming a human wall between her and any exit. The message clear, this conversation wasn't ending until they had answers. Last chance, Bryce said, his voice dropping to a growl. Tell us your call sign or we're going to assume you're just another wannabe trying to play soldier. And trust me, we don't take kindly to stolen valor in this establishment. The atmosphere had shifted from entertainment to something more primal. This wasn't about a confrontation anymore. It was about identity, honor, the sacred boundaries that separated those who had served from those who merely claimed to. The crowd watched with the intensity of spectators at a gladiatorial match, waiting to see if the mysterious woman would reveal herself or be exposed as a fraud. Rowan set down her water glass with deliberate care. The ice cubes clinked against the sides, the sound somehow carrying despite dozens of people holding their breath. She looked at Bryce, then at Sloane, then at the Admiral. Her green eyes held something that made even these hardened warriors unconsciously shift their stances. I don't have a call sign, she said finally. Bullshit, Sloane interjected. Everyone in special operations has a call sign. It's not optional. It's part of the culture, the identity. You're lying. The crowd murmured agreement. This was common knowledge in military circles. Call signs weren't decorative. They were fundamental, earned, sacred. To claim advanced training without one was insulting to everyone who had served. The front door of the outpost burst open. With enough force to make everyone jump, Admiral Hayes stood in the doorway, still in civilian clothes, jeans and a polo shirt that did nothing to diminish the command presence radiating from every fiber of his being. He was breathing hard, as if he'd run from his car. His eyes swept the room in a tactical assessment, found Rowan, noted her position, the surrounding SEALs, the contractor still gasping on the floor. Then they locked onto her face. And something profound shifted in his expression. Rowan met his gaze. For the first time since the evening began, her carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. Her shoulders tensed. Her hands, which had been perfectly still throughout the confrontation, trembled slightly. Not with fear, but with something deeper. Recognition, memory, the weight of a past that wouldn't stay buried. Admiral Colonel Mitchell began from the crowd, clearly confused by the sudden appearance of flag-rank brass at what should have been a simple bar incident. We have a situation here. This woman, the Admiral held up a hand, silencing the speaker mid-sentence. He took 3 steps into the bar, his eyes never leaving Rowan's face. Every conversation had died. Even the jukebox seemed to have stopped playing. Say it, Bryce demanded, emboldened by what he perceived as Rowan being cornered by the highest levels of military authority. Tell everyone your call sign or admit you're a fraud. Rowan stood up slowly from her bar stool. At 5'7", she should have been dwarfed by the SEALs surrounding her. Instead, something in her posture made her seem larger, more dangerous, like a compressed spring containing energy that could reshape the entire room if released. She looked directly at Bryce, her green eyes holding his with an intensity that made him want to step back. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried to every corner of the now silent bar. Phantom. The effect was immediate and devastating. Bryce had been raising a beer bottle to his lips, a gesture of dismissive confidence as he waited for what he assumed would be another lie. The bottle never made it. His hand froze mid-motion, the muscles in his arm locking as if electrocuted. The beer slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers, falling in what seemed like slow motion. The bottle hit the floor with a crash that shattered the moment, golden liquid spreading across worn wooden boards, mixing with foam as chaos threatened to erupt. But Bryce didn't move. He stood frozen, his face draining of color so quickly that Knox moved instinctively closer in case he fainted. Holy mother of... Flint's voice cut through the shock. His phone clattered onto the table. 25 years of special operations experience, missions in every conflict zone on the planet, and he looked like he'd seen a ghost. Because he had. The reaction rippled outward like a shockwave. Sloane's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with the kind of recognition that came from classified briefings in need-to-know operations. Knox dropped the glass he'd been polishing, crystal shattering on the floor behind the bar. Even Admiral Hayes, who had maintained his composure through 20 years of combat operations, visibly staggered. Thompson fell to his knees. The gracelessness of someone whose legs had simply stopped working. His bloodshot eyes fixed on Rowan with something approaching religious awe. "The ghost of Kandahar," he gasped. "You're the ghost of Kandahar." Dmitri managed to lift his head from the floor. Even through his pain, the recognition was clear. In the private military contractor community, certain names transcended normal operations. They became legends, cautionary tales, benchmarks of what was possible when skill met will in the crucible of combat. Admiral Hayes moved forward, then did something that sent another shockwave through the bar. This two-star admiral commander of naval special warfare dropped to one knee in front of Rowan. "Master Chief Phantom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry I didn't recognize you immediately." Phones that had been recording captured the moment. Live streams broadcasting something extraordinary. Comment sections exploding with disbelief. Recognition, frantic searches for information about Phantom. The moment when a tired emergency room nurse was revealed to be one of the most lethal snipers in United States Special Operations history. Bryce's legs gave out. He sank onto a bar stool, his massive frame suddenly looking deflated. The beer from his dropped bottle had reached his boots, but he didn't notice. His mind struggling to reconcile the woman in front of him with the stories he'd heard in classified briefings. 137 confirmed kills, someone whispered from the crowd. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. Sloan found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a croak. "You're the only female operator to ever complete Delta Force selection. The only woman to serve as a primary sniper for Task Force Black. Operation Reaper," Flint added, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd lost friends in that desert. October 15, 2013, classified as the single most successful failed operation in Special Operations history. Knox raised his eyes to Rowan. This woman who had sat at his bar 1,000 times, who had ordered water after long shifts, who had never caused trouble, never sought attention, who had hidden in plain sight for 12 years while the world thought she was dead. Admiral Hayes stood up slowly, his knees protesting the movement. Age and rank hadn't diminished his physical presence, but the emotional weight of the moment was clear on his weathered face. He turned to address the bar, his voice carrying the authority of command. "What you're about to hear doesn't leave this room," he began, though everyone present knew that ship had sailed. The live streams were broadcasting to thousands, soon to be millions. Master Chief Rowan Sterling, callsign Phantom, is the most decorated female operator in United States military history. And until 12 years ago, she didn't officially exist. Every eye in the room fixed on Rowan, understanding that they were in the presence of something extraordinary. Even the background music had stopped, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Rowan remained standing, her posture unchanged despite the weight of every eye in the room. The tremor in her hands from earlier had stilled. She looked exactly like what she had pretended to be, a tired healthcare worker at the end of a long shift. Except now everyone could see what had been hidden in plain sight. The way she stood with perfect balance despite her apparent exhaustion. The scars on her arms that weren't from medical accidents, but from battlefield wounds. The 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen humanity at its worst and chosen to spend her life trying to heal rather than harm. And in the corner booth, Master Chief Thaddeus Flint Garrison stared at the woman he'd thought he'd lost 12 years ago. The operator he'd trained. The soldier he'd sent into hell. The ghost who'd survived when everyone else died. His hands shook as he reached for his whiskey. Because some stories didn't end when bodies were buried. Some warriors didn't stay dead. And some ghosts walked among the living, hiding their true nature until the moment came when hiding was no longer possible. That moment had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same. Admiral Hayes stood in the center of the outpost bar, surrounded by a hush that felt like a living thing. 53 pairs of eyes fixed on him, waiting. The kind of attention that came when secrets were about to be revealed. When the official story was about to crack open and spill truth that had been buried for reasons most civilians would never understand. He turned to Rowan. "You tell them." His voice carried an edge of something that might have been regret or respect, perhaps both. "It's your story, not mine, not the official record. Yours." Rowan remained standing by the bar. Her water glass sat untouched. Condensation running down the sides like tears, the glass was crying on her behalf. She looked at the Admiral for a long moment, then at the crowd. Then at Flint still seated in his corner booth with his weathered hands wrapped around whiskey he'd forgotten to drink. Something passed between them. Recognition, understanding, the unspoken language of people who had shared foxholes and trauma and the peculiar loneliness that came from surviving when others didn't. Flint gave the smallest nod, permission, encouragement. The gesture of a man who knew that some stories needed to be told by the people who lived them, not the people who watched from a distance. Rowan took a breath. Operation Reaper. Her voice was quiet, but in the absolute stillness, it carried like a gunshot. October 15th, 2013, Kandahar Province, Afghanistan. The crowd leaned in, phones still recording, live stream numbers climbing into the tens of thousands. But Rowan wasn't looking at any of them. Her eyes had gone distant, focused on something beyond the walls, beyond the present, seeing a desert half a world away and a lifetime ago. I was 21 years old, she continued, youngest operator on a 6-person Delta Force extraction team. We had a simple mission: extract 81 civilians, aid workers and their families who'd been providing medical care and education in areas where the Taliban didn't approve of either. Her hands found the edge of the bar, gripping it like an anchor, knuckles white with pressure that had nothing to do with physical strength and everything to do with holding herself together while remembering things the human mind wasn't designed to process. Intelligence told us we'd face minimal resistance, maybe 15 Taliban fighters, poorly armed, poorly trained, the kind of opposition 6 Delta operators could handle in our sleep. Bryce shifted uncomfortably. He'd been on missions like that, believed intelligence like that, walked into situations where the official briefing bore no resemblance to the reality on the ground. Our team leader was Commander Nash Sterling. Rowan's voice caught slightly on the name. 29 years old, 7 years of special operations experience, 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan, holder of 2 Bronze Stars and a Silver Star for Valor. Best tactical mind I'd ever seen. She paused. My older brother. The revelation landed heavy. Understanding rippled through the crowd. This wasn't just a military operation gone wrong. This was family. Blood. The kind of loss that left scars no metal could heal. Nash recruited me to Delta, Rowan continued, her eyes still distant, still seeing that desert. Trained me personally. Told me I had a gift for distance shooting, for staying calm when the world went to hell, for making impossible shots when lives depended on it. He'd been protecting me since I was 6 years old, and our parents died in a car accident, raising me, teaching me, preparing me. Her grip on the bar tightened. He shouldn't have been on that mission. He was scheduled for leave, but our primary team leader came down with appendicitis 48 hours before insertion. Nash volunteered, said he wouldn't send his baby sister into a hot zone without him watching her back. Even the hardest operators in the room recognized the weight of that decision. The terrible mathematics of love and duty, the impossible choices that defined military service. We inserted at 0300 hours. Rowan's voice had fallen into the clipped cadence of after-action reports. The emotional distance of someone reciting facts to avoid feeling them. Fast rope insertion from 2 Chinooks. Textbook approach. No enemy contact. We thought the intel was right. She closed her eyes. The compound was 300 meters from our landing zone. 2-story structure, mud brick walls, civilian vehicles in the courtyard. Exactly as briefed. Nash sent me and Master Chief Garrison to secure the roof. Overwatch position while the others moved the civilians to the extraction point. I remember the stairs. Her voice had gone softer. Narrow, dark, smelled like cooking spices and fear. Flint went first. Master Chief Thaddeus Garrison, 57 years old. 23 years in special operations. The man who'd taught me everything Nash hadn't. The operator who'd saved my life twice in training and once in Mosul. From his corner booth, Flint's hands tightened on his glass. His jaw clenched, remembering, knowing what came next because he'd lived it too. We reached the roof at 0314. Rowan continued. Set up our position. I had my M110 sniper rifle. Flint had his M4. We scanned the perimeter through night vision, looking for the 15 poorly armed Taliban fighters intel had promised. Her eyes opened. We found 112. The number hit the crowd like a physical blow. Gasps, whispered curses, the particular horror of realizing how badly intelligence had failed, how thoroughly operators had been sent into a death trap disguised as a routine mission. They were waiting. Rowan's voice never wavered. Dug into positions they'd prepared 4 days, maybe weeks. Heavy machine guns, RPGs, mortars, coordinated fields of fire that turned our approach into a kill box. This wasn't minimal resistance. This was an ambush designed to wipe us out. Nash realized it immediately. Tears began running down her face, but her voice remained steady. Called for emergency extraction. But the Taliban had planned for that too. They hit our first Chinook with an RPG 3 seconds after it entered the valley. 37 people died before the bird even touched the ground. Sloane's hand covered her mouth. She'd lost friends in helicopter crashes, knew the particular horror of burning metal and screaming and the helplessness of watching from a distance. Our second Chinook managed to get airborne, Rowan continued, but it took heavy fire, limped back to base barely holding together, which meant we had 6 operators and 81 civilians surrounded by 112 Taliban fighters with no immediate extraction available. Nash made the call. Her voice broke slightly. Told us to fall back to the compound, use it as a defensive position, hold until they could get another bird to us. He said it would be 90 minutes, maybe 2 hours. We just had to hold. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. The Taliban hit us 18 minutes later. Everything at once. Machine gun fire, RPGs, mortars that turned the courtyard into a crater. They'd been waiting for our extraction to fail. Wanted us trapped. Wanted us desperate. I was on the roof with Flint. Rowan's hands were shaking now, providing covering fire while our team tried to get the civilians into the basement, safe from the shrapnel and the bullets that were tearing the compound apart. I remember Nash's voice on the radio, calm, controlled, calling out targets, directing fire, doing what he always did, leading. Then I heard him scream. Every person in the bar flinched. RPG had hit the entrance where he was positioned. Direct hit. When the smoke cleared, I could see him through my scope. He was down, not moving. Blood everywhere. 2 other operators near him. Also down, also not moving. Her voice had gone mechanical. Specialist Marcus Webb, 26, married, 2 kids, Staff Sergeant Jennifer Cole, 31, single, planning to propose to her girlfriend when she got home. Both dead in the first minute of sustained contact. I started taking shots, Rowan continued. Center mass, headshots when I could get them. Dropping Taliban fighters who were moving toward Nash's position. Flint was beside me doing the same, trying to create enough suppression that our medic could reach them. But the medic never made it. Her eyes closed again. Corporal David Zhang, 23, first deployment, took a round through the throat while running across the courtyard, bled out in 40 seconds. 4 operators down in 18 minutes. The mathematics of combat, the terrible efficiency of well-planned ambushes, the reality that training and equipment and courage sometimes weren't enough. Nash got on the radio one more time. Rowan's voice was barely above a whisper now. Told our last operator, Sergeant Raymond Tucker, to get the civilians into the basement. Seal it. Hold it until extraction arrived. Ray asked about Nash, about the wounded. Nash said they were already gone. A sob broke through. Said the mission was the civilians. 81 lives, women, children, people who'd dedicated their lives to helping others. They mattered more than 5 operators who'd known the risks when they signed up. Then he called my name. Tears were streaming freely now. Said Rowan, little sister, get them out. That's an order. And Rowan, I'm proud of you. Always have been. Get them home. Men in the bar were openly crying now. Those were his last words. Rowan's voice strengthened because 3 seconds later, a mortar round landed on his position. I watched through my scope, watched the explosion, watched my brother disappear in fire and shrapnel and smoke. Watched the man who raised me die. Flint stood up from his booth, moved toward the bar, not to interrupt, not to take over the story, but to stand beside her, close enough that she'd know she wasn't alone, that she didn't have to carry this by herself anymore. Ray Tucker died next, Rowan continued, took 3 rounds covering the civilians' retreat to the basement, held his position until every last one of them was inside. Then he fell, just fell, which left 2 operators. She looked at Flint. Master Chief Garrison and me, 5 of our brothers and sisters dead, 81 civilians trapped in a basement under sustained mortar fire, 112 Taliban fighters closing in, and no extraction for at least 90 minutes. Flint's voice was rough when he spoke. I told her I'd hold the roof, that she should get to the basement, protect the civilians from the inside while I bought them time. I refused, Rowan said simply. I had the better position, better sight lines, better weapon for distance engagement, and Flint had broken ribs from the first explosion. He was hurt, moving slow. I told him to take the civilians and get out, that I'd provide cover. I ordered her to fall back, Flint added, pulled rank, told her I was her superior officer and she would follow my orders. I told him Nash's last words were in order too. Rowan's eyes met Flint's, and I'd already failed to protect my brother. I wasn't going to fail him again by letting more people die. So Master Chief Garrison was going to get his injured ass off that roof, get to the basement, organize the civilians, and coordinate evacuation when the birds finally arrived. Because I was staying, her voice carried absolute conviction. I was holding that roof, and I was killing every Taliban fighter who tried to stop those civilians from going home. Flint's eyes were wet. Hardest decision I ever made, he said quietly. Leaving a 21-year-old operator alone on a roof against an army. But she was right. She had the better position, better weapon, and she was the best shot I'd ever seen. So I went. His voice broke. Left her there, alone, fighting. I wasn't alone, Rowan said, looking at him with something that might have been forgiveness. I had Nash's last order. I had 81 lives depending on me. I had training and ammunition and a very clear purpose. She turned back to the crowd. The next 16 hours are somewhat unclear in my memory. I know I rotated between 3 positions on the roof. Couldn't let them pinpoint where I was firing from. I know I rationed my ammunition, made every shot count, center mass within 400 meters, headshots at distance, conserved rounds because I didn't know how long I'd need to hold. I know the Taliban tried to storm the building 6 times. Her voice was clinical now. I stopped them, all 6 times. Bodies stacked in the courtyard, in the street, in the alleyways. They stopped trying after the 6th assault, switched to indirect fire. Mortars, but they'd positioned for a ground assault, not for sustained indirect fire on a hardened structure. Most of their rounds missed. I know I took fire. She gestured to scars on her arms, her shoulder. Shrapnel mostly. 1 bullet grazed across my left thigh, another through my right shoulder, missed the bone, went clean through. I packed the wounds with quick clot from my kit, kept fighting. I know the Taliban brought up a technical. She continued, pickup truck with a heavy machine gun, started tearing the roof apart. I put 4 rounds through the gunner, 5 through the driver, 6 through the engine block. The truck stopped firing. I know I talked to the civilians. Her voice softened. Through the floor, there was a ventilation grate. I could hear them. They were terrified, children crying, adults trying to be brave. I told them help was coming, that they just needed to hold on, that I wouldn't let anyone hurt them. There were 2 children in particular. Tears started again. Elijah Reed, 9 years old. His father was a diplomat stationed in Kabul. His mother was an aid worker who'd been killed 3 months earlier by a suicide bomber. Elijah and his 7-year-old sister Nora had been staying at the compound while their father worked. Nora had been shot. Rowan's hands clenched, caught a stray round during the initial assault, through her left calf, not life-threatening, but painful, terrifying for a 7-year-old. Flint had bandaged it, stopped the bleeding, but she was crying, scared. Elijah kept talking to me through the grate. Her voice wavered, asking if I was okay, if I needed water, if I was scared. This 9-year-old boy trying to comfort me while I fought to keep him alive. He said he'd be brave, brave like his mother was, like his father said soldiers were. Every person in the bar felt the weight of that. I told him he was already the bravest person I'd ever met. Rowan whispered, that his mom would be proud, that I was proud, that I promised him I'd keep him and Nora safe, that I'd get them home to their dad. I made that promise. Her eyes opened, and I meant it. Flint coordinated 4 helicopter extraction runs. She continued. First one came at hour 6, took 30 civilians. Flint stayed, helped load them, provided security while they boarded under my covering fire. I killed 14 Taliban fighters during that extraction. Second run at hour 9, 25 more civilians. I killed 11 more fighters. Third run at hour 13, 18 civilians, 9 more kills. Fourth run at hour 16. Her voice dropped. Last 8 civilians, including Elijah and Nora, including Flint. Master Chief refused to leave. Flint interrupted, told the pilot those children needed me more than Rowan did. I told him he'd done his job, Rowan said, that the civilians were evacuated, that the mission was complete, that he needed to get on that helicopter because someone had to tell Nash's story. Had to tell the command what happened here. Had to make sure these people got home. And I told him, her voice strengthened, I told him that if he didn't get on that bird, I'd shoot him myself and throw him on board. Because I'd already lost my brother. I wasn't going to watch another operator die for me. So he went. She looked at Flint. But not before Elijah refused to board. Said he wouldn't leave the angel lady. That's what he called me. The angel lady. This 9-year-old boy with a wounded sister stood at the door of that helicopter and refused to leave until I came with him. Tears were flowing freely. So I told him I'd meet him outside, that I needed to grab my gear, that he should go ahead and I'd be right behind him. I lied. The words came out broken. Because there were still Taliban fighters out there. Still threats. The helicopter was taking fire. And the only way to get it out safely was for someone to provide covering fire. So I stayed on that roof. Her voice was mechanical again. Provided suppression while the helicopter lifted off. Killed 6 more fighters. 7, 8. Then I ran. She swallowed hard. Grabbed Elijah and Nora, one under each arm, and I ran. 180 meters of open ground between the compound and the extraction point. Every Taliban fighter left alive shooting at us. Bullets hitting all around us, kicking up dust, tearing through air, through me. I felt the impacts. Her hand touched her left side. 3 bullets, one here, one here, one here. Shrapnel from a near-miss mortar. Blast injuries. I don't remember falling. I don't remember Flint catching us as the helicopter door gunner laid down covering fire. I don't remember Elijah screaming my name. Tears fell. Or Nora telling me to please wake up. Please don't die. Please. I don't remember dying. Her voice was distant. Or Flint doing CPR, or dying again, or him bringing me back. Flint's voice was thick. You died twice on that medevac. Twice I thought I'd lost you. Twice you came back. 19 wounds, Rowan continued. 3 gunshot wounds, 14 shrapnel injuries, 2 blast trauma, 9 months at Walter Reed under an assumed name, physical therapy, psychological evaluation, nightmares about Nash, about failing him, about all the people who died. The official record listed me as KIA, she said quietly. Master Chief Rowan Sterling, killed in action. October 15th, 2013, buried with full honors, flag presented to next of kin. Except there was no next of kin. Her voice broke. Nash was dead, parents dead, no other family. So the flag went to Flint, the man who'd trained me, who'd left me on that roof, who'd spent 9 months visiting me every single day at Walter Reed, who blamed himself for leaving, for surviving. I blamed myself too, she whispered, for living when Nash died, for staying when I could have run, for making choices that ended with my brother in a flag-draped coffin. So when they offered to let me stay dead, her eyes met the crowd. I said yes, because Rowan Sterling, the operator, was broken, destroyed, unable to separate the mission from the guilt, unable to hold a rifle without seeing Nash die through the scope. But maybe Rowan Sterling, the nurse, could do some good. She straightened. Maybe saving lives in an emergency room could balance the scales. Could let me sleep without seeing those 112 kills. Could give me a purpose that didn't involve death. So I became a civilian, she said simply. Learned to heal instead of harm. Learned to see gunshot wounds as puzzles to solve instead of threats to neutralize. Learned to live with the guilt by making sure other people's brothers and sisters went home alive. Understanding washed over the crowd. Why she'd hidden. Why she'd chosen healing. Why the most lethal female operator in U.S. history spent her nights saving lives instead of taking them. Rowan's phone vibrated, sitting on the bar where she'd left it. The screen lit up with a name that made her face go white. Overwatch. She picked it up, answered on the second ring. Yes. Her voice was steady despite the tremor that had returned to her hands. The conversation was brief, one-sided. The crowd could only hear Rowan's responses, but they were enough. When a pause. How many? Another pause. Longer. Her knuckles white on the phone. Understood. Send the package. She ended the call, stood there for a moment, the phone hanging loose in her grip. Whatever she'd heard had drained what little color remained in her face. That was Langley, Admiral Hayes said. It wasn't a question. Rowan nodded slowly. Elijah Reed. Her voice was barely audible. The 9-year-old boy I carried through hell. The one who called me the angel lady. The one I promised I'd keep safe. She looked up, eyes wet but voice steady. He's 21 now. Been running a school for girls in Kabul with his sister Nora, teaching them to read, to write, to believe they deserve education. Doing what his mother died trying to do. The Taliban grabbed him 72 hours ago. Her hands clenched. Him, Nora, 15 female teachers from their school. They're going to execute them publicly in 48 hours. Unless, she swallowed hard, Unless Phantom comes back from the dead, unless the ghost of Kandahar turns herself in. They want me, specifically. Said the ghost who survived Reaper must watch the boy die. Must watch everyone die. Then die herself. Voices erupted. Questions. Concerns. But Rowan wasn't listening. She was staring at something beyond them. Remembering a 9-year-old boy trying to be brave. A 7-year-old girl with a bullet in her leg. A promise made through a ventilation grate while hell rained down around them. You can't. Bryce's voice cut through. You're civilian now. A nurse? You save lives in hospitals. Not in places where hospitals don't exist. Rowan turned to face him. Elijah was 9 years old, held his wounded sister while I fought an army. Told me he'd be brave. That he'd be brave like his mother who died trying to educate girls. Like his father who dedicated his life to peace. Like the soldiers who protected people who couldn't protect themselves. I can't abandon that brave boy. Her voice strengthened. I can't let him die, believing the angel lady broke her promise. If you go, I go. Flint's voice came from beside her. She turned, found him standing close enough that she could see the guilt still living in his eyes. The weight of leaving her on that roof, the burden of surviving when so many others died. Master Chief, you're 68 years old, and I left you once. His voice was iron. Watched you die twice because I followed your order instead of mine. I'm not making that mistake again. If you go into hell, I go with you. Non-negotiable. Rowan studied him for a long moment. Then her expression changed, shifted. The tired nurse falling away, replaced by something harder, more dangerous. The operator who'd held a compound for 16 hours, who'd made impossible shots, who'd survived when survival shouldn't have been possible. This is my mission, her voice carried command. My call, my responsibility. You want to come? You support? You advise. But I lead. Understood. Flint came to attention. Yes, Master Chief. The shift was immediate, recognition rippling through the SEALs watching. This wasn't a civilian making demands. This was an operator establishing chain of command. And Flint, veteran of 3 wars and countless classified operations, had just deferred to her authority. Sloan Mitchell stepped forward, warned. What do you need, Master Chief? Rowan looked at her. This woman who'd threatened her an hour ago, who'd questioned her credentials, who now stood ready to follow orders from a ghost. I need 8 operators. Rowan's voice was clipped. Professional. Tier 1 experience. Volunteers only. This is unsanctioned. Unofficial. If it goes wrong, there's no backup. No rescue. No official acknowledgement. You'll be acting as private citizens on a very dangerous vacation. I'm in, Bryce said immediately. Whatever you need. Me too, Sloan added. Dimitri pulled himself fully upright. I owe you for earlier, for showing me what real operator looks like. I volunteer. Knox came around the bar. Gulf War vet, still remember how to shoot, still remember how to follow orders. I'm in. 4 more voices called out. Operators Rowan didn't know. Men who'd watched her reveal herself. Who'd heard her story. Who'd recognized in her something worth following, even into hell. Admiral Hayes pulled out his phone. I'll authorize ghost support, equipment, transportation, intelligence, all through back channels, all completely deniable. Rowan moved to the center of the bar, operators gathering around her, waiting for orders, trusting her with their lives because she'd proven she valued civilian lives more than her own. We have 48 hours, she began. 17 hostages held in a fortified compound in Kandahar province, same region as Reaper. They're expecting me, specifically, which means they've prepared, they've planned, they've turned that compound into a death trap designed to kill Phantom, and everyone's stupid enough to follow her. She looked at each operator in turn. I'm going anyway, because I made a promise to a 9-year-old boy, and I keep my promises, but I won't order anyone to follow me into what might be a one-way trip. So I'm asking, volunteers only, anyone wants to walk away, now's the time. No one moved. Rowan smiled, thin, dangerous, the expression of someone who'd already died twice and stopped being afraid of it. Then let's get to work. We've got 36 hours to plan an impossible mission, to save 17 lives, to prove that some promises are worth keeping even when keeping them might kill you. She turned to Flint. Master Chief Garrison, I need your experience, your tactical knowledge, your ability to coordinate multiple moving pieces. Will you serve as my senior advisor? Flint's eyes gleamed. It would be my honor, Master Chief Sterling. The crowd began to move. Tables pushed together, laptops appearing. Maps pulled up on phones. The transformation from bar to operations center happening with the efficiency of people who'd done this before. Who knew how to turn chaos into order? How to take an impossible mission and break it down into achievable steps. Admiral Hayes approached Rowan. That boy, Elijah, you really promised him. Yes, sir. Was it worth it? 16 hours alone against an army, dying twice, living with the guilt, all for a promise to a 9-year-old. Rowan looked at him. Every single second, sir. Because that 9-year-old grew up to dedicate his life to education, to helping others, to continuing his mother's work. He's saved more lives through teaching than I ever took through shooting. So yes, it was worth it. Hayes nodded slowly. Then let's make damn sure we keep that promise. Let's bring him home. As the planning began, as operators argued tactics and logistics and equipment needs, as the impossible started becoming merely improbable. Rowan Sterling stood in the center of controlled chaos and felt something she hadn't felt in 12 years. Purpose. Not the purpose of saving lives in an emergency room, but the purpose of being exactly who she'd been trained to be. An operator, a warrior, a woman who'd made a promise and would move heaven and earth to keep it. Nash had told her to get them out. She had. Now it was time to do it again, and this time, everyone was coming home. 36 hours after the revelation at the outpost, a cargo plane touched down at Bagram Airfield under cover of darkness. The aircraft didn't exist in any official record. The flight logs would show a routine supply run that never happened, carrying equipment that was never there, for a mission that would never be acknowledged by anyone with enough rank to matter. Rowan Sterling stepped off the ramp into air that tasted of aviation fuel and memory. Afghanistan. The smell hadn't changed in 12 years. Dust and diesel. Heat that clung to skin even at night. The distant sound of rotor blades cutting through atmosphere that had seen too much violence and held onto every drop of spilled blood. She wore multicam fatigues that bore no insignia, no name tape, no rank. Nothing that could identify her if things went wrong. If bodies needed to be disavowed. If governments needed to deny knowledge of American operators on foreign soil doing things that violated half a dozen international treaties. The weight of tactical gear settled across her shoulders like an old friend she'd hoped never to meet again. Plate carrier, magazine pouches, radio, knife, pistol. The physical burden of preparation. The psychological weight of knowing that in 48 hours she'd either be dead or she'd have kept her promise to a 9-year-old boy who'd grown into a man worth saving. 10 figures emerged from the darkness beside a line of vehicles. Flint materialized first. 68 years old, but moving with the careful efficiency of someone who'd learned to compensate for age with experience. His gear was arranged differently than the younger operators. Optimized for economy of motion rather than speed. For sustainability rather than explosive action. Behind him stood Bryce Callahan and his SEAL teammates. Sloan Mitchell, Dmitry Volkov, Garrett Knox. 3 others Rowan had vetted personally during the planning sessions. All volunteers, all understanding that this mission existed in the gray space between sanctioned operation and private vengeance. Phantom. Flint's voice carried respect and something else. Pride. Welcome back to the sandbox. Rowan studied the assembled operators. Young faces pretending to be hard. Old faces that had forgotten how to be anything else. Men and women who'd volunteered to follow a ghost into hell because they'd heard her story and recognized something worth dying for. Sitrep. She kept her voice clipped. Professional. The tone of someone who'd given orders in situations where hesitation meant death. Flint unfolded a tablet. Satellite imagery glowed in the darkness. High resolution. Real time. The kind of intelligence support that came from Admiral Hayes making phone calls to people whose names didn't appear on organizational charts. Target compound is 20 kilometers northeast of our position. Flint's finger traced the route. Same region as Reaper. Different valley. The Taliban learned from last time. They've established early warning positions here, here, and here. His finger marked 3 elevated positions surrounding the compound. Any air assault gets detected 15 minutes out. Gives them time to execute hostages and fade into the population. They're not trying to hold ground. They're trying to kill Phantom and broadcast it to the world. They're expecting me. Rowan stated it as fact. Specifically you, Sloan added, her antagonism from the bar completely forgotten, replaced by the focus of an operator preparing for combat. They've been broadcasting messages for 72 hours. The ghost of Kandahar will watch another family die. They want you to come. They've built their entire defense around that assumption. Rowan studied the imagery. The compound was a fortress. High walls, limited access points, surrounded by terrain that provided perfect positions for defending forces. Every approach was covered. Every vulnerability had been addressed. It was a death trap disguised as a rescue opportunity. How many hostages? She asked, though she already knew. 17 confirmed, Bryce said. Elijah Reed, age 21. His sister Nora Reed, age 19. 15 female teachers from their school, all sentenced to death for the crime of teaching girls to read. The weight of those 17 lives settled across Rowan's shoulders. Not the abstract weight of mission objectives. The personal weight of specific humans whose faces she'd seen in the intelligence photos, whose stories she'd read in the briefing materials, who dedicated their lives to education in a place where education for women was considered a crime worth dying for. Estimated enemy strength, Rowan continued. 48 Taliban fighters, Flynn answered. Well-armed, well-positioned, experienced. These aren't farmers with rifles. These are veteran insurgents who've been fighting coalition forces for 20 years. Standard assault won't work, Dmitry observed, his Slavic accent still thick but his tactical assessment sound. They execute hostages at first sign of approach. We need different strategy. Rowan traced her finger along the satellite image, marking positions, calculating angles, her mind working through the problem with the methodical precision of someone who'd learned to see battlefields in 3 dimensions, who could visualize firing lanes and dead zones and the terrible mathematics of cover and concealment. They want the ghost of Kandahar, she said finally. Let's give them exactly what they're expecting. 10 pairs of eyes fixed on her. I walk in alone. Rowan's voice was steady, visible, unarmed, hands up, looking like I'm surrendering, turning myself in to save the hostages. They'll want to savor it, want to parade me in front of cameras, want to prove they've caught the ghost. That's suicide, Knox said bluntly. Oh, no. Rowan looked at him. Suicide would be walking in with no support, no plan, no exit strategy. This is calculated risk with every advantage we can manufacture. She turned back to the tablet. While they're focused on me, the team infiltrates from 3 positions I'll identify. The compound's strength becomes its weakness. High walls that keep us out also channel their defenders into predictable positions. Choke points that limit our approach also limit their fields of fire once we're inside. Her fingers moved across the screen. Bryson Sloan here, Western approach. 200-meter low crawl through this drainage ditch. Brings you to the base of the wall outside their primary observation arc. Dmitry and Knox here. Eastern side. These buildings provide concealment until you're within 50 meters. Then it's open ground, but their sight lines are blocked by this water tower. And me, Flint asked. You coordinate from Overwatch. Rowan met his eyes. This position, 800 meters, clear line of sight to the entire compound. You call the plays. Direct movement. Provide precision fire when needed. You're my eyes, my tactical brain, the glue that holds this together. Flint studied the position she'd indicated. That puts me too far away to support you directly if it goes wrong. I know, Rowan's voice was gentle, but I need someone I trust absolutely to run this operation if I go down. Someone who knows my thinking, who can make decisions under pressure, who won't hesitate to call the abort if it becomes a recovery mission instead of a rescue. Understanding passed between them. She was asking him to potentially watch her die. Again, to be the one who survived. Again, to carry the weight of that decision for the rest of his life. I won't let it come to that. Flint's voice was rough. Not this time. I know you won't, Rowan smiled, because this time I have something I didn't have at Reaper. A team, support, people watching my back. I'm not alone against an army. I'm bait in a trap we control. She looked at the assembled operators. Synchronized assault on my signal. I'll count down from 18 seconds. When I reach 0, Flint takes the first shot. Everyone else follows. We collapse their defense from 4 directions simultaneously. They'll be looking at me. At the threat they understand. They won't see the real attack until it's too late. And if the timing's off, Sloan asked. If something goes wrong, then we improvise. Rowan's voice carried absolute conviction. That's what operators do. We adapt. We overcome. We complete the mission. The briefing continued through the night. Details, contingencies, rally points, extraction procedures, radio protocols. The 1,000 small decisions that separated professional operations from amateur disasters. By the time the sun began painting the Hindu Kush mountains in shades of blood and gold, every operator knew their role, their position, their responsibility. 48 hours after the phone call, 36 hours after the planning began, Rowan Sterling walked across an Afghan valley toward a Taliban compound. The morning air was cool, would be scorching in 3 hours, but now it carried the brief mercy of night's retreat. Rowan's boots raised small clouds of dust with each step. Her hands were visible, empty, raised to shoulder height in the universal gesture of surrender. She wore no armor, carried no visible weapons, just walked with the measured pace of someone approaching their own execution with dignity, intact. Behind her, concealed in positions they'd occupied since 0300 hours, 10 operators watched through scopes and waited for her signal. The Taliban saw her coming from a kilometer away. Radios crackled with excited chatter. Fighters scrambled to positions. Weapons trained on the lone figure crossing open ground. This was what they'd been waiting for. The ghost of Kandahar, the woman who'd humiliated them 12 years ago, walking into their trap exactly as planned. Rowan reached the compound's outer perimeter. A line of fighters waited with weapons raised. Among them stood a man who carried himself differently. Older, scarred, his face bearing the particular hatred that came from old defeats and fresh opportunities for revenge. Phantom. His English was accented but clear. The ghost who should have died with her team. You received our invitation. Rowan stopped 10 meters from the line. I'm here for Elijah Reed and his sister. For the teachers, let them go. You want me. You've always wanted me. 17 levs for one. That's a trade even you can't refuse. The commander laughed. Harsh sound that echoed off compound walls. He gestured and more fighters appeared. Lining the walls, positioning themselves for the show, for the cameras that would broadcast Phantom's humiliation to the world. You think you have leverage, his voice carried contempt. You walk into our home with nothing, with no weapons, no support, and you demand terms. He raised his rifle, pointing it directly at Rowan's head. Around the compound, 48 Taliban fighters tightened their grips, waiting for the order to fire, to end the ghost once and for all. Rowan's voice was quiet when she spoke. 18 seconds. The commander leaned forward, confused. What? That's how long you have to surrender. Rowan's voice gained strength. 18 seconds before you understand what you've done, before you realize that inviting Phantom wasn't your victory, it was your death sentence. 17. The commander's confusion turned to rage. 16. His finger moved to the trigger. 15. Around the compound, fighters shifted nervously, something in this woman's voice, in her absolute certainty, made them wonder if they'd missed something, if the trap they'd prepared so carefully had a flaw they hadn't considered. 10, Rowan continued, her voice never wavering. 9, 8. High above on the ridgeline, Flint settled his breathing, his crosshair centered on the commander's head. 800 meters. Wind from the east at 6 kilometers per hour. Temperature rising, humidity low. Every variable accounted for in muscle memory earned through 10,000 shots just like this one. 7, 6, 5. In their concealed positions, Bryce and Sloan prepared to move. Dimitri and Knox checked their weapons one final time. 4 other operators settled into firing positions, all waiting for the signal, for zero, for the moment when everything changed. 4, 3, the commander's finger tightened on the trigger. Rowan stood 15 meters away. No cover, no armor, nothing between her and death except absolute faith that the people she'd trusted would execute perfectly. 2, Flint's voice crackled through concealed earpieces. All teams green. Phantom's call. Phantom's timing. 1, the world held its breath. Execute. The commander's head snapped back, Flint's bullet arriving before the sound of the shot. Before anyone could process what was happening. Simultaneously, 11 other rifles spoke from concealed positions. 12 precision shots. 12 Taliban fighters falling. The compound's outer security collapsing in the time it took a heart to beat twice. Rowan was already moving, her hand finding the pistol concealed in the small of her back. 4 shots, 4 targets, each placed with economy of motion that came from muscle memory, from training, from being exactly who she'd been 12 years ago, when everything went wrong and she'd held the line anyway. She rolled through the compound entrance, using fallen bodies as cover. Behind her, chaos erupted, but it was controlled chaos, disciplined chaos, the kind that came from operators who'd spent 36 hours planning for exactly this moment. Bryce and Sloan emerged from the drainage ditch. Their approach had been perfect, unseen, unheard. They hit the western wall with explosive charges that blew a hole exactly where Rowan had specified, where the compound's design created a blind spot, where defenders couldn't respond without exposing themselves to Flint's overwatch position. Dimitri and Knox sprinted across 50 meters of open ground, moving while the Taliban were still processing the initial assault, while confusion reigned. While their carefully prepared defense turned into a liability, as every exit they'd planned became a channel for operators who knew exactly where to expect targets. The high ground Taliban had occupied to prevent air assault now left them exposed to precision fire from operators who'd mapped every position. Who'd rehearsed this assault? Who executed with the terrible efficiency of professionals who understood that hesitation meant death for 17 hostages depending on them? Rowan moved through the compound's interior, her mental map perfect. She'd studied the satellite imagery for 36 hours, memorized every door, every window, every corridor, knew the building better than the men defending it because they'd prepared for a siege. She'd prepared for infiltration. Gunfire echoed through the compound, but it was one-sided. Taliban fighters scrambling, reacting, dying. The operators moved like wolves through sheep, not because the enemy was incompetent, but because preparation and surprise and absolute coordination created advantages that skill alone couldn't overcome. Rowan found the stairs leading down, basement level where hostages were kept, away from windows, away from potential rescue attempts, in the safest part of the compound, which had now become a trap for the defenders above. She breached the door, found 17 figures huddled in darkness, bound, terrified. Adults trying to shield children from violence they could hear but not see, waiting for execution that had been promised, for death that Taliban justice demanded for the crime of education. Elijah Reed, Rowan's voice cut through their fear. A figure stood, 21 years old, no longer the 9-year-old boy she'd carried, but still carrying those same eyes, that same courage, that same determination to be brave even when brave seemed impossible. Phantom, his voice broke. They said you were dead. They said you died 12 years ago. I did. Rowan produced bolt cutters from her vest, but I made you a promise, and I keep my promises. She moved through the hostages, cutting zip ties, checking for injuries, finding Nora among them. 19 now, the bullet scar on her calf visible even in low light. The sister who'd been 7 and terrified, who'd grown into a woman teaching girls to read in a country that would kill her for it. Can everyone move, Rowan asked. 17 affirmative responses. Then follow me. Stay low, stay quiet. Do exactly what I say when I say it. We're getting you out of here. She led them up the stairs, into a compound where resistance had been systematically eliminated, where operators held positions, where bodies littered ground that had been carefully prepared for defense, where the Taliban's trap had become their tomb. Bryce provided cover as the hostages emerged. Sloan organized them into groups. Dimitri and Knox created a secure corridor toward the extraction point, every operator playing their role, every piece of the plan executing as designed. Through it all, Flint's voice came steady over the radio, calling targets, directing movement, coordinating the ballet of extraction under fire. The senior advisor, whose experience turned chaos into order, who'd spent 12 years blaming himself for leaving Rowan, who was now using every lesson learned to make sure everyone came home this time. Rowan moved the hostages through the compound, counting heads, checking faces, making sure all 17 were accounted for, making sure no one was left behind, making sure the promise made to a 9-year-old boy was being kept. They reached the extraction point, a plateau where 2 helicopters waited, rotors already turning, door gunners scanning for threats, pilots ready to lift off the instant everyone was aboard. Rowan did a final head count. 1, 2, 3, her voice steady, professional. 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. All hostages accounted for. Operators, 1, 2, 3, counting her team now, making sure. 8, 9, 10, everyone present. She turned toward the helicopter. 1 step, 2. Then movement in her peripheral vision froze her. A young Taliban fighter stumbled from behind cover. 17 years old, maybe younger. Blood covering half his face from a grazing wound, his hands shaking as he raised an ancient AK-47, the barrel wavering between Rowan and the helicopter full of civilians he'd been taught to hate. Time slowed. Rowan could draw and fire before he steadied his aim. Every instinct demanded it. Every hour of training screamed threat elimination. Remove the danger. Protect the mission. Pull the trigger. Around her, operator weapons tracked the boy, waiting for her order. One word and he'd cease to exist. One gesture, and the threat would be neutralized with professional efficiency. But Rowan saw something in his eyes. Not hatred, not ideology, just fear. The same fear she'd seen in Elijah's eyes 12 years ago. The same terror of a child forced into situations no child should face. The same desperate courage of someone trying to be brave when brave meant dying. This boy couldn't be more than 17. The same age as some of Elijah's students. Someone's son, someone's brother. A child who'd been handed a rifle and told that martyrdom was glory. That killing Americans was duty. That death was preferable to the shame of education for women. She thought of Elijah at 9, holding his wounded sister, trying to be brave for the angel lady. She thought of Nash telling her to get them out, to save the civilians, to choose life over death. She thought of 12 years spent trying to balance scales that would never balance, of 137 kills that haunted her dreams, of the weight of every trigger pull and the faces she couldn't forget. And she made a choice. Rowan lowered her weapon, spoke in Pashto. Go home to your mother. The boy's finger trembled on the trigger. This war has taken enough children. Rowan continued, same language, same gentle tone. Go home, live. Choose a different path than the men who brought you here. Choose education over violence, life over death, your mother over martyrdom. You don't have to die today. You don't have to kill. You can walk away right now and no one will stop you. An endless moment held. Legendary American operator and child soldier separated by 20 feet and a lifetime of different choices. Every operator's weapon still trained on the boy, still waiting, still ready. Then his weapon dropped, hanging loose in hands that had forgotten why they were holding it. He stepped backward, stumbled, turned and ran, disappearing into the morning shadows like a ghost himself. Flint's voice came over the radio. Phantom target fleeing, confirm hold fire. Confirmed, Rowan's voice was steady. Let him go, he's someone's son. Let him go home. She turned to find every operator watching her. Dimitri with something approaching awe. Bryce with recognition of courage that had nothing to do with pulling triggers. Sloan with understanding that sometimes the hardest shot was the one you didn't take. Mount up, Rowan ordered. The team boarded the helicopters. Rowan helped Elijah and Nora inside, made sure every hostage was secure, every operator accounted for. Then she climbed in last, door gunner providing cover, pilot already pulling pitch. As they lifted off, Rowan looked back at the compound. Smoke rising from scattered fires. Bodies of men who'd chosen violence. Empty space where a boy had stood before choosing life. The valley where 12 years ago she'd lost everything. Where today she'd kept a promise made when promises seemed like the only thing worth making. The flight to the forward operating base was silent except for rotor noise. Elijah sat beside Rowan. His hand found hers, gripping with the same trust he'd shown as a 9-year-old. But now their positions were different. Now he was offering comfort, sensing the weight of what she'd just done, the choices made, the lives taken and the life spared. Nora spoke quietly. The boy with the rifle. Why didn't you shoot him? Rowan was quiet for a long moment, staring out at mountains flowing beneath them, at a country that had taken so much from her, that had given her purpose and guilt in equal measure, that had taught her what she was capable of and what that capability cost. Because I've killed enough. Her voice carried 12 years of accumulated wisdom and pain. Every enemy fighter was once someone's child, someone's son, someone who might have chosen differently if they'd been given the chance. Choosing not to kill when you can, she continued, when every instinct says you should, when it would be justified. That's sometimes harder than pulling the trigger when you must. That boy gets to go home. Rowan looked at Nora. Gets to choose a different path. Maybe he becomes a teacher like you. Maybe he educates his own children. Maybe he breaks the cycle of violence that's trapped this country for generations. Or maybe he picks up that rifle again tomorrow, she acknowledged. Maybe he kills someone who deserved better. Maybe my mercy today creates casualties tomorrow. I don't know, can't know, but I made the choice I can live with. Because living with the kills I had to make is hard enough. Her voice strengthened. Living with kills I chose not to make. That's how I sleep at night. The helicopters touched down at the forward operating base. Officially, they'd never been there. The mission would never appear in any record. The hostages would be processed quietly, given new identities, relocated to places where Taliban revenge couldn't reach. The operators would disperse. Return to lives where this operation existed only in memory and in bonds forged under fire. But first came goodbyes. Elijah stood before Rowan as they prepared to separate. 21 years old now, eye to eye with the woman who'd saved him twice, who'd kept a promise made through a ventilation grate while hell rained down. You gave me life twice. His voice was thick. How do I repay that? Rowan studied him. This man who'd dedicated his existence to education, who'd built schools where others burned them, who'd chosen to honor his mother's memory through teaching rather than revenge. You already have, she said gently. Every girl who learned to read in your school, every mind you opened, every life you changed. That's the repayment. That's how we really win this war. Not with bullets, with books, with knowledge, with the stubborn refusal to let violence defeat hope. She paused. Keep teaching, Elijah. Keep building. Keep showing them that education is stronger than extremism. That's how you honor what happened 12 years ago. That's how you honor everyone who died so you could live. Elijah nodded, unable to speak, understanding that some debts could never be repaid. Only paid forward. The team dispersed over the next hour. Sloan surprised everyone by hugging Rowan, whispering something only the two of them would ever know. Bryce rendered a perfect salute. Recognition between operators who'd shared the crucible. Dimitri gripped her shoulder with the particular respect of someone who'd learned what real strength looked like. Knox was last to leave, the old Gulf War veteran who'd tested her with the Glock, who'd recognized something in her movements that spoke of training deeper than civilian self-defense, who'd served his country and now served drinks while remembering. You did good, Master Chief. His voice was rough. Your brother would be proud. Those words hit harder than expected. Nash, who'd died giving her an order, who'd trusted her to complete the mission, who'd never know that the little sister he'd raised had become exactly the operator he'd believed she could be. Flint was last, standing apart from the others, waiting while everyone else said their goodbyes. Finally approaching with something in his hand, an envelope, worn, official looking. What's this? Rowan asked. Your discharge papers, Flint said quietly. The real ones. Turns out there was a clerical error 12 years ago. Master Chief Rowan Sterling was never officially declared killed in action. Just missing. Presumed dead. This makes your retirement official. With full honors, full benefits. Rowan stared at the papers. Her name. In print. On official documentation. The resurrection of an identity she'd thought lost forever. The acknowledgement that she'd existed, served, survived. I don't know what to say. Say you'll go back to saving lives, Flint's voice was gentle. Say you'll find some peace. Say you'll let us buy you a beer at the outpost when we get home. She looked up at him. This man who'd trained her, who'd left her on a roof because she'd ordered him to, who'd spent 12 years carrying guilt that wasn't his to carry, who'd just watched her complete an impossible mission and spare an enemy's life. Thank you. Simple words, insufficient. For everything. For training me, for believing in me, for being there when I needed you. Always, Flint's voice was rough. That's what mentors do. We stay, even when our students surpass us. 8 months later, Rowan stood in her San Diego apartment preparing for a journey. The emergency room at Coronado Medical Center had offered her a promotion, head of combat trauma services, a newly created position with a mandate to develop protocols for treating battlefield injuries in civilian settings, to train the next generation of emergency physicians, to bridge the gap between military medicine and civilian care. She'd accepted. It meant responsibility, visibility, an end to the anonymous existence she'd cultivated. But it also meant purpose, legacy, the chance to turn 12 years of guilt into something that might save lives. But tonight she had somewhere else to be first. The drive to Fort Rosecrans National Cemetery took 40 minutes through evening traffic. The Pacific Ocean spread to the horizon beyond the white headstones, endless rows of markers for those who'd served, who'd sacrificed, who'd come home in flag-draped coffins or not at all. She found Nash's grave easily, had been here 1,000 times in 12 years, each visit carrying the same weight, the same questions, the same guilt that wouldn't die no matter how many lives she saved. Master Chief Nash Sterling, Delta Force, 1984 to 2013, he got them out. Rowan knelt. The grass was damp from evening fog, the stone cold beneath her fingers as she traced his name. 29 years old forever. Big brother who'd raised her, trained her, died giving her an order she'd spent 12 years trying to fulfill. I kept your promise, Nash. Her voice was quiet. Elijah and Nora, all 17 of them. Everyone came home this time. The ocean wind carried salt and memory. Flint thinks I've moved past it. The guilt, the wondering if I could have saved you, if I'd moved faster, shot better. Been the operator you believed I could be. She closed her eyes. But I know the truth. You gave that order knowing it would kill you. You sent me to the roof because you knew I was the only one who could hold it. You died so 81 people could live. So I could live. I understand now. Tears fell. Why you did it. Why you always protected me. It wasn't because you thought I was weak. It was because you knew I was strong enough to carry the weight of surviving. She opened her eyes. I'm not just surviving anymore, big brother. I'm living, leading, teaching others what you taught me. That the mission matters more than the operator. That some promises are worth any price. That being a warrior means knowing when to fight and when to spare. The sun was setting, painting the ocean in shades of blood and gold. The same colors that had painted Afghan mountains when she'd made impossible promises and kept them through impossible odds. I'm starting the new position next week, she said, Head of Combat Trauma Services. They're naming the program after you, the Sterling Protocol, teaching civilian doctors how to treat battlefield injuries, how to save lives when everything's gone to hell and proper procedure doesn't exist anymore. You'd like that. She smiled through tears. Your name helping people, your legacy being measured in lives saved instead of operations completed. I spared someone. The words came out quiet. A boy, 17, Taliban fighter. I could have killed him, should have. But I saw Elijah in his eyes, saw someone's little brother who'd been handed a rifle and told to die for a cause he probably didn't understand. So I let him go. Tears flowed freely now. Told him to choose life, to go home to his mother. And he did. He dropped his weapon and ran. I don't know if I did the right thing. Her voice broke. Maybe he'll kill someone tomorrow. Maybe my mercy will cost someone else's life. But I made the choice I can live with, the choice you'd have wanted me to make. Because you taught me. She straightened. That being a warrior isn't about how many people you can kill. It's about how many you can save, how many you can protect, how many you can give the chance to choose differently. She stood. I'm okay, Nash. Finally. After 12 years of trying to balance scales that were never meant to balance. I understand that saving lives doesn't erase the ones I took, but it gives meaning to why I survived when you didn't. Thank you, her voice steadied, for raising me, training me, loving me enough to die so I could live. I'll make it count, I promise. She saluted, held it for 10 seconds, then lowered her hand and walked away. Behind her, Nash's grave stood silent among thousands of others. Warriors who'd given everything, who trusted that their sacrifice would matter, that someone would remember, that the mission would continue even after they fell. Rowan looked back once. Everyone came home, big brother, just like you ordered. The wind carried her words to the ocean, to the horizon, to wherever warriors went when their battles ended and new battles began for those they left behind. Back at her apartment, Rowan's phone rang. International number, she answered. Hello, Miss Phantom. The voice was young, female, heavily accented English. My name is Amira. I was student in Elijah's school in Kabul. Rowan sat down on her couch. He gave me your number. The voice continued. Said I should call, tell you, I got accepted to medical school in London. Full scholarship. I start next month. Tears began flowing. Elijah said you were a nurse who saved lives. Amira's voice carried hope. He said women can be warriors in different ways, fight different battles, win different victories. I want to be like you. Save lives, not take them. Thank you for saving our teachers. Thank you for showing us strength has many faces. After the call ended, Rowan sat surrounded by the quiet of her apartment. On her coffee table lay 3 items arranged with care. The challenge coin Flint had given her at the bar, a photo of her Delta Force team, Nash in the center, young, confident, alive, and a new photo. 17 teachers and students standing in front of a rebuilt school, Elijah and Nora in the center, all of them alive, free, teaching. Her phone buzzed, text from Bryce. Simple, direct, military efficient. Team dinner at the outpost tomorrow, 1900 hours. That's an order, Master Chief. Rowan smiled, typed back. Copy that. But I'm buying the first round, Shion. Another message appeared. Different number, encrypted. She booked it. Phantom, your unique skills and experience needed. 23 children, trafficking ring, Arizona border, consulting basis only, complete deniability, interested Overwatch. Below it coordinates, intel package attachment, timeline. Not Afghanistan this time, not foreign soil, but somewhere closer to home. somewhere children were suffering, somewhere the conventional authorities couldn't or wouldn't act, somewhere a ghost might make a difference. Rowan picked up her phone, hesitated, thought of Amira going to medical school, of Elijah building schools, of the boys she'd spared who might choose education over violence, of Nash's last order to get them out. She'd gotten them out, kept doing it, would keep doing it as long as she could. She dialed Flint's number. Thought you might call. The old operator's voice carried knowing amusement. If you're going after traffickers on the border, you'll need someone who knows that desert. Someone who fought there in '91. Someone stubborn enough to keep watching your back even when you don't ask. Master Chief Garrison, Rowan's voice held warmth. Are you volunteering? Someone's got to make sure you don't do anything stupidly heroic. Flint replied. Besides, you taught me something about mercy, about choosing life over death, about being more than the sum of our kills. Figure I should stick around, see what else I can learn from my best student. Rowan looked at the photos on her table. Nash, her team, the hostages, the schools, the lives saved and the lives spared. The impossible promises kept and the new ones forming. Tomorrow night, she said, 1900 hours, the outpost. We'll brief the team, see who else is interested in a road trip to Arizona. Copy that, Phantom. Flint's voice carried pride. See you then. She ended the call, looked out at city lights twinkling in the darkness, each one representing a life, a story, a possibility for redemption or ruin. Rowan picked up a pen, wrote on a notepad beside the encrypted message, single line for herself. Nash taught me to fight. Flint taught me to survive. Life taught me to lead. Now it's my turn to teach others. She set the pen down, looked at her reflection in the window. Not the tired nurse, not the legendary sniper. Something new, something forged in fire and tempered with wisdom. A warrior who'd learned that the strongest battles were the ones fought for others, that the truest victories were measured in lives saved rather than enemies killed. Master Chief Rowan Sterling, call sign Phantom, and somewhere in Arizona 23 children waited for an angel they didn't know was coming. The mission continued, it always would, because some promises were worth keeping, and some ghosts refused to stay dead.